everything you do will create a ripple effect in your life. And when we think of it as patriarchs and matriarchs, we get to have generational impact in everything we do. And one of the concepts that is really kind of the foundational phrase of the book is everyone leaves a legacy. It's either a default version or an intentional one. But for us to think we don't have impact on future generations is naive. So the butterfly effect in its shortest form is everything you do matters and it has a ripple effect that goes on forever.
It takes something a little more to lead with impact. I'm Lisa Nichols, author of Something Extra, and this podcast was inspired by our daughter Allie, whose additional chromosome has shaped how I see people in leadership. Each episode features conversations with inspiring leaders from around the world about what truly defines how they lead and serve others. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please consider leaving a 5-star review. It helps more people discover the show. And if you'd like to go deeper, my book, Something Extra, is available on Amazon and through other major book retailers. I'm thrilled to have Lance Welch on the show today. Lance is a business and legacy building coach, author of the Legacy Navigator, and the co-host of Beyond the Nest podcast. Well, Lance Welch, welcome to the Something Extra podcast. It is so good to be with you today. I cannot wait for our conversation.
I've been looking forward to this.
I have been too. You live in Nashville,
Just outside
which
Nashville.
I told you we love. Greg and I grew up in Paducah, Kentucky. We had so many of our friends after college that ended up in Nashville. And what a town. What a town. I've traveled there just recently for some business, and it is booming.
It's still booming. And no signs of slowing down right now.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. So I hope to see you more because I'm hoping to be there a little bit more. So,
Look forward to it.
but I always love to tell my listeners, and I think I'm going to do a little study on this, Lance, to go back and see how many people are connected to Jim Bechtold.
Oh,
Because Jim Bechtold is the one that connected you and I and said,
yep.
hey, the two of you guys need to meet one another. And when I heard about what you were doing, I was just like, you have to come on the podcast, Lance. I love what you're doing. And then you went on to connect me to Aaron Sanders, who's also been a guest. It's beautiful just how that snowball effect
It is.
works, right?
Yeah, Jim he's got the gift of connecting, that's for sure.
He does. Yeah, he's got lots of gifts, but definitely connecting, encouraging is another, affirmation is another one of his many gifts. I just love having him in my orbit. But you spent, I think, 28 years as an exec at Allstate.
Yes. Different level.
28.
Yeah. Started out in sales and for some reason thought I wanted to get into management and just kept climbing. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So you were an executive there. For our listeners who don't know, I'm sure everybody knows Allstate, but it is a Fortune 100 company.
Yep.
I think it's the largest publicly held personal line insurance. So I don't know, that could have changed, but big company, and you rose through the ranks. And I think, let's just talk about this. What shaped you in your early years? I mean, you started out in sales, but just kind of tell us a little bit of the journey. And then I've got scads and scads and scads of questions for you, but let's just talk about this for a minute.
Yeah, okay. So started out definitely in sales because I was, I grew up in a pretty poor household. My dad worked 3 jobs, hourly wage jobs, the entire time I was growing up. So I had a lot of incentive of what can I do with my life. He was an amazing dad, still is an amazing dad. I still have him with us. But I knew that I wanted more than that. And, it is so much easier today. I look at what my boys are building. They're all 3 entrepreneurs. Being able to build a business today is a lot different than what it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so I knew that for me to have a better living, a better standard of living, I probably was going to have to go into sales. I'd always been told that sales is either the highest paid, most enjoyable, or the lowest paid, most frustrating. So it's like from one extreme to the other.
Right.
And I love the freedom that it provided. I love the opportunity to be able to, in the initial phases, I was very self-centered, very egotistical, air my laundry here right at the beginning. But I
Yeah.
just wanted to make a lot more money. And it started out in life insurance sales. And when it became real was when I had to deliver my very first death claim. And it was to a very young couple. Excuse me. We lived in Shreveport, Louisiana, and very, very unfortunate, but it was a random drive-by shooting. And totally, I mean, most murders are uncalled for. This is just random. But when I delivered that death check to that young widow, she was 24 years old and two young children. It changed forever how I
Mm.
saw what did I do. It went from me being able to win a trip for my wife and I to go to a place we'd always dreamt of going to people cannot walk around without adequate amount of life insurance. And from that day forward, it just became a passion to be able to make sure that people did not have to endure the what we now see the GoFundMe accounts that we see a lot of.
Right.
So began to excel. Won trips. We got to travel all over the world, and like most corporations, if they find a person who can sell really well, they typically think they're going to be a good manager, which is not the case. Just because you can sell something doesn't mean you can lead people. But I always loved being a leader. I
Mhm.
was introduced to John Maxwell and his content very, very early on and became just a fanboy of John and what
Yes.
he has built. I'm now a coach within his organization, and I've followed him for probably the last 40 years. And he has just got the most consistent track record of developing leaders, and he's known as the world's greatest leadership expert. And so I just began to develop myself as a leader, grew in the corporate ranks, and when my boys were probably getting into the double digits, the 10 to 12 years old, something clicked in me that realized that all of the content that corporate was pushing down to us as leaders to develop our teams, all I had to do is switch the verbiage from a corporate perspective to a personal perspective. And it was very similar content on what I started building for our family as far as year-end reviews, family vision casts, quarterly family reviews, the QFR versus a business's QBR.
Sure.
I just love the leadership side of things. And knowing that I had three young men in my house, I wanted them to be equipped to leave the house well, not just leave. I wanted them to be prepared to leave. And that was kind of my quest into leadership. It was, yes, for corporate, but more so with what I could lead and equip my boys to do.
Mhm. That is so beautiful. I love that. So did corporate, like, because I know, like, success, I mean, you definitely had success. I think at one time, Lance, you had 3,000 reps, at
Yeah.
least 3,000 plus reps in
Yeah.
14 different states. I mean, you were definitely leading, but when you were talking to leadership about this, it's not just, I said leadership doesn't stop at the office.
Mm-mm.
Leadership really, cascades into every piece of our life, really, if we allow it to.
Oh, it will.
But I love that. Were you able to, with the people that you were leading, were you able to translate for them? This is not just what you're doing here at Allstate for the business, but you can use these concepts with your family. Were you able to do that
Yeah.
with the people that you were leading?
We did, and that was really what led to the my wife and I have a podcast called Beyond the Nest.
Yes.
There was a phenomenon that I began noticing that a lot of my agents, my reps that were incredibly successful, but they were entering the empty nest phase of life. Things were beginning to break down, and I began to notice. And now I've recently found a statistic that actually supported what I saw: is there is a 40% spike in the divorce rate at empty nest. And so when I began to start recognizing that there was something happening at that phase of life, then I love to study. I love to research, find out cause and effect. And that
Yes.
did give a lot of opportunity to start talking about, how do you succeed at work and home, that it's not either or, but it's both and it was a
Mhm.
pretty easy concept to transition into.
Yeah. Wow. And you used to see that so much, right, Lance? I mean, we can get with work in our careers, we can get so entrenched in that. And then, there's collateral
Yeah,
sometimes, unfortunately, that's left behind.
true.
So, and so I know that that's, we're going to get into that. That's like what you are really passionate about today, both you and Allison. But, I want to talk about this. So you're very open. There was, you've got the three boys, and I know that they're all like entrepreneurs and they're successful. You say they were strong-willed,
Yes.
three strong-willed boys. You know, I want you to, if you can, talk to our listeners about this because you talk openly about the dictator dad
Mm.
phase that you went through.
Yeah, my wife could probably talk about it even better, but she was always the buffer between me and them. And I grew up an athlete, lettered in everything. My jerseys retired. I mean, it was my life. My drug of choice was basketball. Didn't get into actual drugs, but my drug of choice was just as devastating because everyone had to take a backseat to that. And in the younger days, used to well, it's true now. I can say it used to be the concept of just kill them all and let God sort them out. I'm a high D on the disc profile, and I only had fun if I was winning. And so it was a drug that really drove me, and just about cost my marriage in the early days. And
Mhm.
just the grace of God that we've been now married just over 38 years. So there is hope for all of us.
Yes.
Uh, and my oldest son, he is also a very strong-willed type A personality. And in the younger days, I can remember so many times. I can even get pictures or envisions now, the looks on some of their faces. It's like when you say things, you can't take those words back, but you can see
Mhm.
what you talked earlier, collateral damage. You could see what you did. And my wife was always the buffer between me and them. And it was only through growing as a leader that I was able to realize, I could I could lead just as effectively at home as I did at work. And I can remember several times my wife would say, "I wish you would study us and how to communicate with us as much as you studied your agents and how to communicate with them." And that
Wow.
was kind of a hard wake up call. It's like I spent an enormous
Mhm.
amount of time to become a better leader in the corporate world.
Yeah.
I didn't until later learn that, what, my family deserved every bit, if not more, attention on how do I study them and learn their language patterns? How can I motivate them to grow in the areas that I want to, instead of just being the dictator and trying to make it happen.
Mhm.
That makes sense.
That'll preach. That'll preach, Lance. That is so good. Um, what do you think? I mean, and obviously your boys have gone on to be successful in that, but what do you think your family was feeling during that time? What do you that dictator, what do you move from? I think it was you, and I could be wrong on this because sometimes my memory fails me, but I feel like you may have said to me, you kind of move from even a coach to a consultant
Hmm.
as your kids get older. I think you're the one that said that to me, Lance, and I thought that is so good because really a consultant as they get older, they're asking for your help, right?
Yeah.
Instead of you going, "Let me tell you how it is. Let me
Yeah.
tell you what you need to do." Right? So, maybe there is a listener out there that's like, "Gosh, I feel like maybe that's me, that I'm more of a dictator." What are some of the things that you can start doing? But you talked about studying your family, but how do you move from that dictator to more of that consultant type mindset with your children?
Mm. Well, I think just like anything else, there's got to be a level of awareness that something isn't quite working.
Yeah,
And was it Einstein said that it's the definition of insanity to continue to do what you've always done and expect different results?
something different, right? Mhm.
And so if something isn't working, it does not make sense to keep doing the same thing. And one thing that we've learned as parents of, I would say this would be going to parents of mid to upper teens into young adults, is if we continue to dictate how to do things, we are literally robbing our children from being able to learn how to do things on their own.
Mm.
Society rewards obedience. It doesn't always reward strategic thinking. But the value prop comes in when you're able to think through solutions. And our society doesn't always appreciate that. I know that when I used to take the boys and check them out of school to take them to John Maxwell events, the teachers thought that I was ruining their education. And I saw it exactly opposite, so that was counted as an unexcused absence for them. But they didn't appreciate that. And I was totally okay with that because I wanted my boys to be in environments that were bigger than them, that were over their heads, and they didn't understand what John Maxwell was talking about or any of his speakers when they were 13, 14 years old. But all three of them will tell you that those were some very instrumental days for them to recognize, one, that dad cared enough to go against status quo.
Right.
It taught them to really how to think for themselves. But back to what your really question was, is our teenagers, upper teens and young adults, they will grow to the extent that you allow them to grow. And what we learned the hard way is that age group, they don't want to be fixed. Even if you as a parent feel like they need to be fixed, they don't want to be fixed.
Mm.
Anytime we as an adult look to address something that our upper teens or young adults don't ask us for, it is viewed as criticism. And that was a hard lesson for us to
Yeah.
learn, is unsolicited advice almost always comes across as criticism.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good. That's gold right there. Well, as you were talking, Lance, I just thought about this. And it's like that dictator dad is speaking to their head,
Mm,
but you're certainly not capturing their heart.
correct. That's a good
In
word.
fact, you're pushing that piece away, I think,
That's
right?
correct.
So,
100%.
yeah, that's so good. Um, well, for you, what were some of the hardest habits to unlearn? Moving from, the dictator dad to more the consultant dad. What were some of
Wow.
your habits that you had to unlearn?
I'd say the hardest one for all three of them was that I knew the only right way to do something. When we continue as parents or even as leaders, this is something we talk a lot with a lot of my clients. Ask your subordinates, what do they feel like the right solution would be? Even if
Yeah.
you know the right way to do it, chances are it's not the only right way. And if we're going to talk about the child parent scenario, is if I will ask them, I will be amazed at what they will come up with. But as long as I just keep telling them what to do, it's like I'm cutting them off at the knees
Yeah.
and I'm robbing them of the ability to learn to think. So the hardest thing for me was to not always step in and quote fix things. And it's so much easier. A phrase we use a lot with our kids, always have, is you can choose your inconvenience. It is inconvenient for me to ask my sons, even to this day, what do you think? I can tell them what to do
Right.
in about 5 seconds,
Yeah.
or I might take 15 minutes to ask them, what do you think should be done, and walk through the process. So it's inconvenient to take that extra time to ask them the question. But if I refuse to be inconvenienced now, I can promise you I'll be more inconvenienced
Minutes
later.
later.
Yes.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Lance, and I know you have a book too, and we'll talk about it, but the Something Extra book, it just reminded me of a few things. So I start the book with humility.
Hmm.
And if you think that your way is the only way, that's the opposite of humility.
Right. Right.
Right? That's the opposite of humility. And then the other, leadership trait, character trait that I was thinking about, also a fruit of the spirit, um, is patience.
Mm,
And I know for myself, sometimes I am not long on patience. I'm short on patience.
yeah.
So what you just said, I can tell them in 5 seconds,
Yeah.
where it might take me 15 minutes to explain, but the inconvenience now is going to save you in the long run. And I
Absolutely.
just think that's gold.
And
That is
and
gold.
and your willingness to be inconvenienced now, it is literally, in my opinion, setting them up for success later, which
Mhm.
obviously it reduces my inconvenience later. I mean, none of my boys are on my payroll anymore. They've all moved out. They're standing on their own 2 feet. I've got two amazing grandchildren that we get to just spoil. So yeah, it's a matter of choose your inconvenience. Steve Harvey had a talk a while back. He called it choose your hard.
Mm,
Same basic framework. Choose your inconvenience. You can choose it. You can be inconvenienced now or greater later. It's your choice.
yeah. That's so good. That is so good. Well, I wanna ask you one more question, and then we need to take a quick break, but you and Allison have a podcast called Beyond the Nest. I would really, really, really highly recommend our listeners go get that podcast. Do you guys, does a new one drop every week? What's the cadence for
It's
you guys, Lance?
Yeah, it usually comes out every Tuesday morning.
Every Tuesday morning,
Yeah.
okay. Well, we'll put it in the show notes, how people can listen, but why do you think, because somebody might be sitting there right now and going, "Oh, yeah, I'm a little lost. I'm a little lost right now because we're in this empty nest, or that empty nest is coming."
Mm.
You know, what are some of the things that couples can do now, um, Lance, to keep from, and you gave the one statistic, which is a staggering statistic, 40%
Yeah.
go through divorce in that empty nest.
Well, it's
But
actually worse than that. It's a 40% spike
a 40% spike.
in the empty nest. Yeah. So the
My
divorce rate's
goodness.
already there. It's bad as we
It's
know.
bad as it is, but it goes up in
Right.
that case. Give us some practical things that a couple can do now to prepare for that.
Oh man, first thing is don't do it alone. There's such value in community, either your own local community, your close circle of friends is a huge, huge benefit. Uh, Resources today, Lisa, there's so many more resources today. uh, Internet opened up the world to that. YouTube, podcasts, books. What we've
Mhm.
noticed, there's not a lot of books though, with this segment, empty nest phase. There's a ton of books on what to do when you're expecting, the toddlers and the younger
Yes.
ages, but there's not a lot of resources out there. But the number one thing is don't do it alone. Don't believe the lie that no one else knows what you're going through, they've never experienced this
Mhm.
depression. I was visiting with someone we're going to do some collaborative work with here pretty soon, and he and his wife have a business together. He's an event planner, she's a travel planner. And then when they asked, we got through the business side of what we're looking to do with them, they asked what I did, and I ended up telling them about the Beyond the Nest. The call went a totally different direction. They are getting ready to be in the empty nest phase, and the mom has been dreading it for 2 or 3 years already. She's beside herself, and
Mhm.
she wants to have a conversation with Allison just because she is scared to death of
Yeah,
what's going to happen. So, the number one thing is get in community. Find
yeah.
some resources
Good.
and don't do life alone. The other is to recognize that our job is to equip our kids to launch, right?
Mhm.
We don't,
It's a natural order,
it is.
right, Lance?
There was an
Yes.
early book. I've always been a massive reader, but there was an author, he's passed away now. He's a guy named Steve Farrar, wrote many, many good books on, if there's any dads that are looking for parenting or dad type books. The number one thing I would do from Steve is one called The Point Man. Fantastic book. But in one of his books, he tells that his dad told him when he graduated high school, he said, play the man, shook his hand, not a hug, but shook his hand and walked away. And he said the rest of the drive to school, he's trying to figure out his words. He said, what the hell does that mean? He had no idea. What did it mean to play the man? And that always stuck with me, is like, my boys are not going to have to ask that question. So a
Yeah.
lot of it, we get to learn either by our own trial and errors, or ideally we get to learn from someone else's. But sometimes we're just stubborn headed and we're going to learn it our own hard way. But the number one thing for me is learn from others.
Yeah, that's good. That is so good. Well, Lance, we need to take a quick break and we'll be right back on the Something Extra podcast with Lance Welch.
In business, the tendency is to seek out partners who are bigger, faster, stronger. When it comes to IT, you should be looking for smarter, faster, better. That's just what you'll find with the talented technologists at Technology Partners. Our experts develop custom solutions to tackle your most complex challenges, all to simplify your processes in the smartest, most efficient way possible. The time to be swift and nimble starts now. Go to technologypartners.net/solutions and see what's possible.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Something Extra podcast with my friend Lance Welch. So, Lance, I read a blog that you wrote in 2023 about the butterfly effect.
Mm.
And you talked about, well, I don't want to steal your thunder here, but it was kind of something about the Nobel Prize and that sort of thing. Can you explain what is the butterfly effect?
Everything you do will create a ripple effect in your life. And when we think of it as patriarchs and matriarchs, we get to have generational impact in everything we do. And one of the concepts that is really kind of the foundational phrase of the book is everyone leaves a legacy. It's either a default version or an intentional one. But
Yes.
for us to think we don't have impact on future generations is naive. So the
Yeah.
butterfly effect in its shortest form is everything you do matters, and it has a ripple effect that goes on forever.
That's so good. That is so good. Well, let's talk about your book.
Okay.
Because you released a book early 2024, I think it
Yep.
was. I got it on Audible, called The Legacy Navigator. Tell me why you wrote the book. Tell me a little bit about the book. How was that experience? Because, I just wrote my own book, and it is an experience.
It is indeed. And I laugh because even I just turned 60 this year. My wife and I both turned 60. We had our 38th anniversary. We had just an amazing family trip. But we, when it's like, doesn't matter how old you get, you still have moments of, did I really say that? And it started with me asking my oldest son, who's got a really successful podcast of his own, millions of downloads a month. He's got a very successful business. But I asked him, I said, hey, why don't you give Dad some referrals for my coaching business? And he said, well, why don't you create some content so I can say, hey, check out his content instead of, hey, work with my dad.
Right.
And I'm like what? And he said, write a book. All the boys, my wife, they said I should have written a book a long time ago. And I just did not ever see myself as an author. And, our identity is such a powerful thing.
Yes.
It took probably a year into the book, after the book launched, before I was even comfortable saying, yeah, I'm an author. I don't know why I had to hang up on it, but I did. But anyway, so I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to write it on sales. I've been in sales since college. The first sales job I had was selling
What I know.
water cookware door to door. Talk about rejection. So
Yes.
I got about 1,000 words in, and it was like such a roadblock. It was so painful. I didn't even enjoy it. So I'm like, I'm going to write something else. I'm going to write on leadership. I read so many books of John Maxwell's. I'm like, I could recite most of them. This will be easy. Again, I got about 1,000 words in, and it was just painful. I wasn't enjoying the experience at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I have an exercise that I call give him the pen. I'm talking about giving God the pen, and I just sit and I listen, and I'm just writing down whatever thoughts hit my head. I'm just writing them down. And this particular day, I felt like the question is, well, what are you really passionate about? And the first word that hit my head was a legacy. And it's like, oh, well, what if I were to write about a legacy and do a study? What does legacy actually mean? Because most people, when they hear leave a legacy, they automatically think of finances.
Financial.
And
Right.
that's not it at all. But so once I got on the topic of legacy, I never stopped writing. I mean, I was done then in about 4 months of writing the rough draft. And it's not a long book. It's a 3-hour listen on Audible, 100,
Right.
140 pages. But I didn't have a problem ever sitting down and writing 250 to 1,000 words. But it was like once I figured out what God wanted me to write about instead of
Amen.
what Lance wanted to do, all of the information just began to flow. It was not hard to write. I mean, I don't want to sound arrogant, but it's like I'm now pulling from 30 years worth of working with high net worth families and the different sectors of what I got to do. And it's got a lot of life examples in there, a lot of true life examples, a lot of application questions. I didn't want the book to just be read as a piece of entertainment. I wanted it to be generational impact. I wanted there to be exercises in there that if people were serious about it, they weren't not going to have to reinvent the wheel. They just have to follow through on the chapter implementation sections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I think that's so important because I did the same thing with my book. I'm like, I don't want people just blowing through. I want reflection questions and exercises that they can sit with. You walk through a legacy table and you say that there's 4 legs. Most tables do have 4 legs.
Yeah.
Stools sometimes have 3, right?
Right.
But tables have 4 legs.
Yeah.
So, what are the 4 legs and why do all 4 legs matter? And to your point, a lot of times I do think, Lance, people, when they think about legacy, they think about the financial inheritance that they're going to leave. But that is like a minute part,
Yeah.
truly,
Yeah.
of the whole.
And the legacy table, I give credit to Allison on this. Again, she used to tell the boys when they were younger, boys, you will always have a seat at our table. You may not want it, but the seat is always there for you. And so that framework, it was like no matter what the boys did, which they did plenty of bonehead things, they still do. Still a Welch, they will always
They're a Welch.
have a seat at our table. That's a given. So it was from that framework that's like I began to build around, well, what does the table do? We know what the power of family meals and all this is. No argument there, but I use that as a framework of if we were to assign a value mechanism to each one of the legs, what does it mean? So leg 1, it was vision. Leg 2 is value. Leg 3 is knowledge. And then leg 4 is the wealth. And each one of those legs, we walk through, how do you transfer your values to the next generation? Well, it is incumbent that you know what your values are first.
Yes.
Right. And then there's an exercise in the back of the book that helps people walk through what are your core 5 values as a family. I would say 90+% of America everyone operates from a value base. I'm not saying they don't have values, but
They haven't defined it.
they haven't defined it.
They haven't written it down.
No. And this exercise allows a husband and a wife, if it's a couple, if it's a single parent, God love you, do the exercise, because what it does is it helps you ground every decision you now make based upon a proven method of these are my values. I went through the exercise and this is what it means.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so each one of the legs, there's exercises in the book to get to it. But to your point, the wealth leg, which is the 4th leg, the reason it's the 4th one is if I've done leg 1, 2, and 3 well, there's an entire industry set aside that makes leg 4 incredibly simple.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is so good. I love it so much. I would encourage our listeners because I do know people, I've got a friend, Matthew Porter, that was a tech exec, entrepreneur, CEO, then tech exec. He does that with his family. He's got a vision. He's got a value statement. Rick Lytle, who is another Rick and Jeannie Lytle, he's the CEO for CEO Forum, has done that with his girls from the time they were little. They do, vision boarding and, they've got a mission statement as a family. And I think, goodness gracious, we spend so much time, Lance, with our businesses.
Yeah.
Coming up with our core values and our mission and our vision. Why aren't we doing that with our families?
That
Right?
was one of the number one questions I was asking 30 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I want to ask you this. And some people may think this is morbid. I don't think it's morbid. I think it's a good exercise. But you talk about a powerful story about reading your own obituary.
Yeah.
And it's a very transformative exercise. So it's kind of like I think about Covey, start with the end in mind. What do you want people when you're gone at your funeral? What do you want people to say about you? And then you work backwards, right?
Correct.
Can you talk about that story and why that is so powerful, and people might feel weird about that, but you know.
Yeah, no, I love this story, and most people don't know about it, but and I'm sure, assuming you're talking about the two brothers from the munitions expert. Is that the one you're talking about in the book?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
So there were two brothers, late 1700s, Alfred and Ludwig. They were brothers and both incredibly successful businessmen. But Ludwig passed away, and in error, the journalist that was writing the obituary wrote it about Alfred, the younger brother. And so when
Mhm.
Alfred opened up the paper and was beginning to read, thought he was going to read his brother's obituary, he was actually reading his own. And this was written by a third party that was labeling him as the king of death, the munitions expert, just obliterated him. And he was reading this thinking, this is how I'm viewed, and immediately decided that this would not be my legacy. And he was worth hundreds of millions of dollars even back then. And he made the determination then that he was going to set up a foundation to reward those who worked in the peace efforts that brought peace to all the communities and societies. What's interesting, and I didn't even put this in the book, when he made that decision, he only lived another 5 years. So it wasn't like he had decades and decades to build on what he started.
Yeah.
But most people have recognized that even though he made a determination and only to change the way he was going to be viewed, and
Viewed.
only lived another 5 years to make it actually happen, his legacy has now made worldwide impact ever since. So Alfred Nobel was his name, and we now know it as the Nobel Peace
Peace Prize.
Prize.
Right.
Reading his own obituary was allowed him to have an awareness. And I always say you cannot address what you're not aware of. But
Mhm.
once he became aware of it, he decided now is a time to change. And so I believe, honestly, that's where this exercise comes from. You hear a lot of coaches and consultancies that will say, hey, write your own obituary the way it is now, write it the way you want it to be. What is the gap? And now how do you address it? I really believe it probably came from this Alfred Nobel Peace Prize story.
Yeah, I absolutely love that story. That'll be a story that sticks with me, right? And so what I take away from that, do the exercise, first of all,
Yeah,
figure out what the gap is. But Lance, it's not too late.
never.
You can change that, right? You
Yeah.
can change how you're going to be viewed. And so, yeah, that's so beautiful. I love it. Well, let me ask you this. What's the role that faith has played in your journey?
Oh man, everything, everything. The just the acknowledgement that, well, one, I'm not alone. I am not a creator. I'm not God. There is God, but and I am not Him. I honestly believe that I would not be married at this point. Our first
Mhm.
couple of years, though, the first year was wonderful. Years 2, 3, I wouldn't wish on anybody.
Yeah.
And we talk about that in one of the podcasts. We had a newborn, and she went home. She left, and her daddy sent her back. And that was
Good for him,
it was, and it was a really
right?
hard lesson for her, but
Yeah.
also for me. But it was one of those wake up calls. And there was a young, I say young man, he's about 2 years older than me, still one of my closest friends. We're not in the same states anymore. But Lisa, when I talk about community, when I mentioned that earlier, there was a young man, he was probably 2 years older than me. He was an amazing tennis player, and mine was basketball, but he was teaching me how to play tennis. And I had carefully constructed these walls around me that you only saw what I allowed you to see.
Mhm.
We might have a fight, Allison and I, on the way to church, but when we got out of the vehicle, we're smiling.
Yes,
Everything's great.
right.
We pulled into the driveway one day after playing tennis, and he goes, "Hey, buddy, can I tell you something?" I'm thinking he's going to tell me something about tennis. And I'm like,
Mhm.
"Yeah, sure." He paused for a second, and he looks at me, he goes, "You're being an ass to your wife." Caught me completely off guard, and it made me
Wow.
so mad because I'm like, who gave you
Who are
permission?
you?
Who
Yeah.
are you? And so we had a little bit back and forth, and it ended with, "Hey," goes, "I'm sorry I offended you, but I just want you to know you ever need me, I don't care what time. It could be 2 a.m. You call me, I will be there. And I told him, don't hold your breath. I was so mad. Unfortunately, within the week, we had a spat over something probably stupid. And I ended up punching a hole in the sheetrock. And then I looked down at the clock and it was 1:58 a.m. And his voice came back and I'm like, I'm going to call. I'm going to see what
I'm
happens.
going to take him up on this. Yeah.
He was there in about 10 minutes. I had
So
never
he
allowed,
came to your house?
he came to my house.
Wow.
I had never once allowed anyone inside these parameters.
Yeah.
And once I did, I'm really like, there's some freedom in this. I started going to, he led a men's group at our church. And I started learning that other men actually had a fight with their wife on occasion too. I realized that I had been doing it the hard way and doing it alone all that time. So from a faith perspective, it was such a wake-up call to have someone be so brutally honest. They cared about me enough and my marriage enough to be brutally honest.
Yes.
That is priceless.
It is
It was
priceless.
amazing.
It reminds me of my guest that was on last week, Lance, and he talks about having a corner man. And he's like, you got to have a corner man or a corner woman. You got to have that one person, at least that one person that you can be totally real with. And men holding one another accountable, women holding one another accountable. And I know for me, I've had people like that. I've had one lady, and I'm telling you, I mean, she had a hard conversation with me one time and said, Lisa, you are not honoring your husband right now. And kind of to your point, at first you're like, what? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
She was older, she's probably about 10 years older than me, but I respected her and I knew that she loved me and she was, and I'm telling you, it was a pivotal point for me in how I viewed that. So, yeah. I mean, but it's hard. I'm not going to lie to you, listeners. If you're out there and you're feeling like you're on an island, get off the island. Get off the island and get in community with somebody. So, so important. Well, let me ask you this, and maybe this would tie into it. If someone's listening today, Lance, and they realize they're really off track, they're not in alignment in their life, what is one step that they can take today to change their legacy?
Oh, well, there's so many things. For me, from just a faith-based perspective, is slow down and lean into the quiet. And for me, ask God, where do I go from here?
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's good. And he promises that when we call on him, he will answer and show us things that we do not know.
Yeah.
So that's a beautiful word.
Oftentimes it's the quiet whisper that he's leaning into for us. And that's why I'm like, get into a quiet place, embrace the stillness, the quietness. We are addicted to busy as a culture, and to busy, it's usually chaotic, it's noisy, it makes it really hard. Doesn't mean that God can't get our attention. But if I can acknowledge I am off track and I want to fix it, I'm believing that there's enough discipline and willpower to slow down, lean into the quietness, and just ask the question, where do I go from here?
That's beautiful. Well, let me ask you this, because I ask every guest this question. What is the something extra that you believe every leader needs?
Oh, man, I think you nailed it at the beginning, humility.
Yeah.
Humility it goes so far at work, at home. It is incredibly hard to argue with my wife when she's leaning into humility, or vice versa, right? It just kind of nips it in the bud. Same with dealing with your teenagers or your adult children. Humility will stop most arguments.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good word. Lance, I knew this was going to be good. I knew it was. And this did not disappoint. Thank you so much for being willing to share your wisdom. And I just pray that it helps people.
Amen.
I know that it will. I know that it will. So thank you, my friend. And I hope to see you in Nashville face to face.
I look forward to that. We'll make it happen.
Yes, absolutely.
Something Extra with Lisa Nichols is a Technology Partners production. Copyright Technology Partners, Inc., 2019. To learn more about this week's guest, check out the show notes at tpi.co/podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, consider leaving us a review. Thank you for listening to Something Extra.